Some insults cut so deep they awakened sleeping demons. The air hung thick and suffocating in that Medellin warehouse, heavy with cigarette smoke and the kind of tension that makes smart men stupid. Maria Santos pressed herself against the shadows, her camera hidden, documenting what she thought would be just another cartel meeting. She'd spent 15 years making films about Colombia's drug wars, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Eduardo Vasquez, a man whose cruelty was legendary even among killers, stood before 30 of the most dangerous people in South America, laughing as he described Dixon Blanco's death. "The little prince," he sneered, "died begging like his whore mother taught him." The room erupted in nervous laughter, but Maria felt her blood turn to ice. She knew Dixon, not just as Griselda Blanco's son, but as the brother she'd never been allowed to claim. When Griselda finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, yet somehow every person in that warehouse heard her perfectly. She smiled, an expression more terrifying than any scream, and said just 3 words that would haunt Maria for the rest of her life. What did Griselda whisper that night, and how did those 3 simple words destroy a man more thoroughly than bullets ever could? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hook. He's still watching. Those 3 words fell from Griselda's lips like drops of poison into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this moment. Maria's finger trembled on the camera's record button as she watched Eduardo's face drain of color. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a silence so complete she could hear her own heartbeat thundering against her ribs. Griselda Blanco stood motionless in the center of the warehouse, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of every killer in the room. She wore a simple black dress that made her look more like a grieving mother than the most feared woman in Colombia's underworld. But her eyes, Maria had forgotten about those eyes. Dark as obsidian, holding depths that promised either salvation or damnation, depending on which side of her mercy you found yourself. "What did you say?" Eduardo's voice cracked slightly, the bravado from moments before evaporating like morning mist. Griselda tilted her head, studying him with the patience of a predator who knows the prey is already trapped. "Dixon, my son, he's still watching." She paused, letting the words settle into every corner of the warehouse. "He sees everything you've taken from his friends. Every debt you've forgotten to pay, every promise you've broken since the day you put that bullet in his head." Maria pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her filmmaker's instincts warring with something more primal, the terror of a child who'd spent her entire life hiding from this world. She'd come to Medellin with a simple plan: document the truth about Dixon's death, get closure for the brother she'd never known, and return to her safe life in Miami. But watching Griselda work, seeing the surgical precision with which she dismantled a man's courage with nothing but words, Maria realized she'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a drug war. This was personal. Eduardo tried to laugh, but the sound came out strangled. "You're talking about ghosts, vieja. Your son is dead. I made sure of that." The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. Several of the men shifted uncomfortably, hands drifting toward concealed weapons, not to use them, but for comfort. Maria recognized the gesture. She'd seen it in war zones, in the moments before everything went to hell. "Dead, yes," Griselda agreed, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone. "But you know what's interesting about the dead, Eduardo? They have such perfect memory. They remember every detail from their final moments. The smell of their killer's cologne, the nervous sweat, the way a man's hand shakes when he's shooting someone he knows he shouldn't." Eduardo's hand was shaking now. Maria zoomed in on it through her hidden lens, capturing the tremor that betrayed his growing fear. "You want to know what else the dead remember?" Griselda continued, beginning to walk slowly around Eduardo like a shark circling wounded prey. "They remember secrets, things they saw but never got to tell. Bank account numbers written on scraps of paper, hidden recording devices, the faces of people who were supposed to be loyal friends but who whispered locations to enemies." With each word, Eduardo seemed to shrink. Maria had seen interrogations before, had filmed confessions extracted through torture and brutality, but this was something else entirely. Griselda wasn't breaking Eduardo's body. She was systematically dismantling his soul. "I don't know what game you're playing," Eduardo managed, but his voice carried no conviction. "No game," Griselda replied, stopping directly in front of him. "Just a mother having a conversation with her son's killer. You see, Dixon told me something interesting last night. In my dreams. He told me about a warehouse in Envigado, building number 47. He said you've been skimming from the Ochoa family shipments. 20% off the top, wasn't it?" The color drained completely from Eduardo's face. Maria felt her own stomach lurch, not from the accusation, but from the impossible certainty in Griselda's voice. There was no way she could know that. No way anyone could know that, unless... "He also mentioned your little problem with the Cali cartel," Griselda continued, her voice never rising above a whisper. "How you've been selling them information about our routes in exchange for protection. Funny thing about protection money, it only works if the people you're betraying don't find out." Eduardo's knees buckled. He caught himself on a nearby crate, sweat pouring down his face despite the warehouse's chill. "How could you possibly—" "I told you," Griselda said, her smile returning. That terrible, knowing smile that made Maria's skin crawl. He's still watching. The warehouse erupted into chaos as Eduardo's men began backing away from him, their loyalty evaporating like smoke. In the criminal underworld, betrayal was a death sentence, and Griselda had just painted a target on Eduardo's back with information that should have been impossible to obtain. Through her camera lens, Maria watched a man's empire crumble in real time, destroyed not by bullets or bombs, but by the surgical application of fear and perfectly placed truth. And somewhere in the darkness, she could swear she felt Dixon watching too. Maria's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she navigated the crowded streets of Medellin, the camera equipment bag heavy against her shoulder, feeling like evidence of a crime she'd witnessed but couldn't yet comprehend. The morning sun beat down mercilessly, but she couldn't shake the chill that had settled into her bones during those terrifying minutes in the warehouse. Every face in the crowd seemed to carry a threat. Every vendor's shout made her jump. She needed to call Sofia. The payphone outside the Hotel Nutibara offered some semblance of privacy, though Maria knew better than to trust any line in this city. She fed coins into the slot with trembling fingers, each metallic clink echoing her heartbeat as she dialed her daughter's number in Miami. "Mom?" Sofia's voice carried that particular blend of affection and exasperation that only a 16-year-old could master. "You know I'm trying to finish my summer reading before school starts, right? The Great Gatsby isn't exactly riveting stuff." The normalcy of the complaint nearly brought tears to Maria's eyes. Here was her real world. Homework deadlines, teenage complaints, the comfortable chaos of suburban life. Not warehouses filled with killers. Not women who spoke to the dead. Not the suffocating weight of family secrets that could destroy everything she'd built. "I just wanted to hear your voice, mija," Maria said, leaning against the phone booth's glass wall. "How was your night? Did you remember to eat something other than cereal for dinner?" "Mom, you've been gone 3 days. I managed to survive the first 15 years of my life. I think I can handle a few weeks without supervision." But Sofia's voice softened. "Are you okay? You sound weird." Maria closed her eyes, seeing again Griselda's terrible smile, hearing Eduardo's broken whimper as his world collapsed around him. How could she explain that she'd just watched a ghost take revenge? How could she tell Sofia that everything they'd built together, their quiet life in Coral Gables, the carefully constructed story about Maria's past, the safety they'd carved out of nothing, might all be built on lies that were finally catching up with them? Just tired, Maria lied. The altitude here is different, and the interviews have been intense. That, at least, was true, though interview was a generous term for what she'd witnessed. She'd come to Colombia to make a documentary about the human cost of the drug trade, using Dixon Blanco's death as a way to explore how violence rippled through families and communities. The story had been approved by her editor at PBS, funded by a small but respectable grant, and represented exactly the kind of serious journalism that had built her reputation over the past decade. What she hadn't told anyone, not her editor, not the grant committee, certainly not Sofia, was that Dixon Blanco was her half-brother. Maria had been born Maria Blanco in a Cartagena hospital 45 years ago, the product of one of Griselda's brief, violent relationships with a man whose name had been lost to time and deliberate forgetting. She'd been given away at birth to American missionaries, adopted by the Santos family in Miami, raised in ignorance of her true parentage until a chance photograph in a newspaper had sent her world spinning off its axis. The caption had read, "Drug Queen's son murdered in Medellin," but it was the boy's eyes in the grainy photo that had stopped her heart. Eyes exactly like her own, carrying the same stubborn intelligence, the same hint of sadness. Those eyes had haunted her dreams for months. Dixon Blanco had died at 23, gunned down outside a Medellin nightclub by rivals who wanted to send a message to his mother. Maria Santos lived safely in Miami, raising her daughter, building documentaries that mattered, keeping her real name buried so deep that sometimes she almost forgot it herself. Almost. "Mom, you're breathing funny," Sophia said, her voice carrying genuine concern now. "What's really going on? And don't say it's the altitude because you filmed in the Andes before." Maria's daughter had inherited more than just her mother's dark eyes and stubborn chin. She'd gotten the journalist's instinct for detecting lies, the ability to hear what wasn't being said. It was one of the things that made Maria proud and terrified in equal measure. Sophia was smart enough to see through any story that didn't hold up under scrutiny. "There was an incident last night," Maria said carefully. "Some cartel business. Nothing that affects me directly, but it was disturbing to witness. Just reminded me how much I miss home, how much I miss you." The truth was more complicated. Watching Griselda work, seeing the surgical precision of her psychological warfare, Maria had felt something she hadn't expected: recognition. Not just of shared blood, but of shared nature. The cold calculation, the patient observation, the willingness to wait and watch until the perfect moment to strike. Weren't those the same qualities that made her a successful documentary filmmaker? The same instincts she used to earn her subjects' trust before exposing their secrets to the world? The thought made her stomach churn. "Promise me you're being careful," Sophia said. "I know you think you're invincible behind that camera, but you're not. Come home in one piece, okay? I need someone to help me understand why Gatsby thinks staring at green lights is a personality trait." Despite everything, Maria smiled. This was what she was fighting to protect. This normal, beautiful, ordinary world where the biggest crisis was teenage literary confusion. "I promise," she said, though the words tasted like ash. But as she hung up the phone, Maria knew she was lying. She couldn't leave now. Not when she was so close to understanding the truth about Dixon's death. Not when she'd finally seen Griselda in action, witnessed the terrible precision of her mother's love and rage. She shouldered her camera bag and walked back into the heat, back toward the heart of a war she was only beginning to understand. Behind her, the phone booth stood empty, holding the echo of promises she wasn't sure she could keep. In her pocket, the hidden recorder she'd been running all night felt like a loaded gun. The Hotel Nutibara's lobby buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Businessmen nursing hangovers behind newspapers, tourists arguing over maps, prostitutes ending their shifts with the weary efficiency of factory workers. Maria moved through the crowd like a ghost, hyper-aware of every face, every gesture that might signal recognition or threat. The recorder in her pocket seemed to pulse against her ribs with each step, a digital heartbeat carrying evidence that could topple governments or get her killed. She made it halfway to the elevator before she saw him. Carlos Henao sat in a corner booth of the hotel's restaurant, his broad frame unmistakable even in civilian clothes. Griselda's nephew, her most trusted lieutenant, the man who'd stood silent in the warehouse while Eduardo's world crumbled. He wasn't hiding. His presence was deliberate, a message delivered with the subtlety of a billboard. Their eyes met across the lobby. Carlos raised his coffee cup in a mock salute, his smile carrying all the warmth of a shark's grin. Maria's blood turned to ice water. They knew who she was. They'd known all along. She forced herself to walk normally to the elevator, feeling Carlos's gaze burning into her back. The ride to the 7th floor lasted an eternity, each floor chime marking seconds that might be her last. By the time she reached her room, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the key. The door opened to reveal her worst nightmare made manifest. Griselda Blanco sat in the room's single chair, patient as a spider in its web. She'd changed from the black dress into a simple white blouse and dark skirt, the uniform of middle-aged respectability. Without the warehouse's dramatic lighting, she looked smaller, almost fragile. But those obsidian eyes held the same terrible knowledge, the same promise of violence wrapped in maternal concern. "Maria Santos," Griselda said, her voice carrying a slight accent that transformed each syllable into something between caress and threat. Or should I say, Maria Blanco? The camera bag slipped from Maria's nerveless fingers, landing on the carpet with a soft thud that sounded like thunder in the silence. Every carefully constructed wall she'd built around her new identity crumbled with those 4 words. Maria Santos, the respected documentary filmmaker, the devoted mother, the woman who'd clawed her way out of nothing to build something beautiful, all of it reduced to ash by the simple acknowledgement of a name she'd abandoned 45 years ago. "I don't know what you're talking about," Maria managed, though her voice cracked like thin ice. Griselda's laugh was soft, almost musical. "Mija, you have your father's stubborn chin. Did you know that? Victor Morales. He was handsome enough but stupid, thought he could steal from me and disappear into the jungle." She paused, studying Maria's face with clinical interest. "I found him, of course, but by then you were already gone. The missionaries were very thorough about covering their tracks." The room spun slightly. Maria gripped the doorframe, fighting the urge to run. Where could she go? If Griselda had found her here, in a hotel registered under her legal name with documentation that had fooled customs officials, then nowhere was safe. The woman who'd reduced Eduardo to a whimpering shell with nothing but words wouldn't need much effort to destroy one documentary filmmaker. "What do you want?" Maria whispered. "Want?" Griselda tilted her head, the gesture eerily reminiscent of a bird of prey examining its meal. "I want what any mother wants, to protect her children, to honor her dead, to see justice done." She stood slowly, smoothing her skirt with hands that had ordered countless deaths. "You came here to learn about Dixon's death. Why?" The truth sat in Maria's throat like broken glass. She could lie, invent some professional interest, claim journalistic objectivity. But those eyes, her mother's eyes, seemed to see through every possible deception. "He was my brother," Maria said, the admission tearing something vital inside her chest. "Yes," Griselda said simply. "He was. And now he's gone. And you're here. And Eduardo Vasquez is about to discover that some debts follow you into hell itself." She moved closer, close enough that Maria could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral that belonged in gardens, not warehouses. "The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't understand." "You have a choice, Mija. You can pack your cameras and run back to Miami, back to your pretty daughter and your safe little life. Forget you ever had a brother named Dixon. Forget you ever saw justice served in a warehouse last night." Griselda's voice dropped to a whisper. "Or you can help me finish what that pendejo started when he put a bullet in my son's head." Maria's world balanced on a knife's edge. Behind her lay everything she'd built. Sophia's future, her career, the carefully constructed normalcy that had taken decades to create. Ahead lay a path that led into darkness, into a war that devoured everything it touched. In her pocket, the recorder held secrets that could change everything. The choice was hers. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, and Maria felt herself falling into it. Her hands found the edge of the dresser behind her, gripping the wood until her knuckles went white. The recorder in her pocket seemed to burn against her ribs, evidence of horrors she'd witnessed, secrets that could destroy lives, including her own. "I need time," Maria said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Griselda's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, or the cold recognition of weakness. "Time," she repeated, as if tasting the word. How much time did Dixon have when Eduardo put that gun to his head? How much time did he have to beg for his life? The words hit Maria like physical blows. She closed her eyes, but that only made it worse. Behind her lids, she saw Sophia's face, heard her daughter's laugh echoing across their quiet Coral Gables home. Sophia, who had no idea her mother was anything other than Maria Santos, PBS documentary filmmaker, who had built her identity on exposing truth while living the biggest lie of all. "My daughter," Maria began. Is safe, Griselda cut her off. For now. Beautiful girl. 16, yes? Good student. Wants to study journalism at Columbia. The casual display of knowledge sent ice through Maria's veins. She thinks her mother is in Columbia making a film about social justice. Very noble, very naive. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Maria's breath came in short, sharp gasps as the full weight of her situation crashed over her. There was no running from this. No amount of careful documentation or false names that could protect Sophia from a woman who commanded armies, who could reach across continents to settle debts written in blood. You would hurt a child? Maria asked, though she already knew the answer. I would protect my family, Griselda replied, as any mother would, as any mother should. She moved to the window, gazing down at the bustling street below with the air of a general surveying a battlefield. Eduardo Vasquez has 2 daughters himself, 15 and 13. They attend Sacred Heart Academy in Bogotá. Lovely girls. They have no idea their father murdered their classmate's brother. Maria's stomach lurched. The implication was clear. This war wouldn't stop with Eduardo. It would spread like cancer, consuming everyone in its path until the debt was paid in full, unless she acted, unless she chose a side. But choosing meant abandoning everything she'd fought to become. Maria Santos was a woman of principle, someone who documented injustice without participating in it, who exposed corruption from the safety of ethical distance. Maria Blanco would be something else entirely. An accomplice to vengeance, a participant in the machinery of violence that had already claimed too many lives. I'm not a killer, Maria said, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them. Neither was I once, Griselda replied without turning from the window. I was a girl from the slums who wanted pretty things and a man who wouldn't hit me. But the world teaches us what we need to become to survive. She faced Maria again, and for a moment her mask slipped. Beneath the cold calculation, Maria glimpsed something raw and wounded, a mother's grief, as sharp and terrible as broken glass. They took my son, my firstborn, the only thing in this God-forsaken world that mattered more than my own life. The pain in those words was so naked, so honest, that Maria felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about love, the same desperate, protective love she felt for Sophia, the same willingness to burn the world down if anyone threatened what mattered most. What exactly are you asking me to do? Maria heard herself say, though part of her recoiled at the question. Griselda's smile returned, but it was different now. Warmer, more genuine. For the first time since entering the room, she looked less like a predator and more like a mother. What you do best, Mia. Watch, record, document the truth. She gestured toward Maria's abandoned camera bag. Eduardo thinks last night was the end. He thinks he can disappear into the jungle, hide behind his cartel connections, wait for my grief to make me careless. He doesn't understand that this is just the beginning. And if I refuse? The warmth vanished from Griselda's eyes as quickly as it had appeared. Then you pack your cameras and leave Columbia. Today, you go back to Miami and forget you ever had a brother named Dixon, forget you ever learned the truth about what happened to him. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. And you spend the rest of your life wondering when someone might remember that Maria Santos used to be Maria Blanco. The choice hung between them like a blade. Maria thought of Sophia, probably still struggling with Gatsby and summer reading, safe in their normal world. Then she thought of Dixon, a brother she'd never known, who died alone and afraid while his killer walked free. In her pocket, the recorder waited. Evidence of justice served, or the first chapter of something far darker. How long do I have to decide? Maria asked. Until sunset, Griselda replied. Then Eduardo's trail goes cold, and the chance for justice dies with it. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. Choose carefully, mija. Some decisions echo through generations. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Maria alone with the weight of blood and consequence pressing down like Colombian sky before a storm. The minutes crawled by like dying things. Maria stood frozen in the center of her hotel room, watching shadows creep across the floor as the sun traced its merciless arc toward the western mountains. Each tick of the bedside clock marked another second closer to a choice that would shatter one life or another. Sophia's peaceful existence in Miami, or Dixon's demand for justice from beyond the grave. She tried calling home twice. Both times, her finger hovered over Sophia's number before she canceled the call. What could she say? "Hello, sweetheart. I just discovered I'm the daughter of the most dangerous woman in Colombia. And by the way, you have a dead uncle you've never heard of?" Some truths were too large for telephone lines, too toxic for a 16-year-old's world of homework and college applications. Instead, Maria found herself pulling out her camera, the weight of it familiar and comforting in her hands. Through the viewfinder, the room looked different, smaller, trapped in the rectangular frame that had defined her professional life. She'd spent 15 years documenting other people's pain, other people's choices, always the observer, never the participant. The camera was her shield, her excuse, her way of touching horror without being consumed by it. But the lens couldn't protect her now. She ejected the tape from last night. The warehouse, Eduardo's humiliation, Griselda's terrible precision. Hours of footage that could destroy governments or start wars depending on who watched it. Her hands shook as she labeled it with clinical detachment, Colombia investigation, Day 3, subject, G. Blanco, as if reducing her mother to a research subject could somehow make this easier. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd come to Colombia hunting Dixon's story, drawn by those familiar eyes in a newspaper photo. She'd wanted to understand the human cost of violence, to give voice to the forgotten victims. Now she was both filmmaker and subject, hunter and prey, daughter of the dead and child of the killer. At 4 o'clock, she tried to eat something from room service. The food turned to ash in her mouth. At 5, she called her editor at PBS, listening to his enthusiastic questions about footage and interview schedules while her world burned down around her. She heard herself making appropriate responses, professional commitments, promises about delivery dates. The words came from some automated part of her brain while the rest of her spiraled into the abyss. Choose carefully, mija. Some decisions echo through generations. Griselda's voice haunted every corner of the room. Maria could still smell her perfume, could still feel the weight of those obsidian eyes measuring her soul. How many other children had been abandoned to protect them from this life? How many other Maria Blancos were scattered across the world, living borrowed names and borrowed lives, never knowing they carried violence in their blood? The sun touched the mountains at 6:30. Orange light flooded the hotel room, painting everything the color of fire. Maria stood at the window, watching Medellin transform in the dying light. Somewhere out there, Eduardo Vasquez was probably planning his escape, thinking he'd survived Griselda Blanco's wrath with nothing more than wounded pride. He had no idea that his real punishment was just beginning. Below in the street, she spotted Carlos Henao leaning against a car, patient as death, waiting for her decision, waiting to see if she would emerge as Maria Santos with her camera bag and plane ticket, or as something else entirely. Maria thought of Dixon, 23 years old, gunned down outside a nightclub for the crime of being Griselda's son. Had he looked like their father? Had he inherited that stubborn chin, those dark eyes that saw too much? She would never know. Eduardo Vasquez had stolen that possibility along with everything else. She thought of Sophia, safe in their Coral Gables home, probably curled up with homework and headphones, living the normal life Maria had fought so hard to build. That normal life had been purchased with lies, but they were good lies, protective lies, the kind that let children sleep soundly while their mothers carried darkness. At 6:45, Maria made her choice. She loaded fresh tape into her camera and checked the battery levels. Methodically, she packed her equipment bag, extra lenses, backup recorder, the small digital camera she used for reference shots. Her hands moved with professional efficiency, muscle memory taking over while her mind went quiet and cold. She left the PBS business cards on the dresser, left the return plane ticket, left the last traces of the woman who'd flown to Colombia 3 days ago believing in the comfortable fiction of objective journalism. When she walked out of the Hotel Nutibara into the gathering dusk, Carlos Henao straightened from his car. Their eyes met across the street, and Maria gave a single, sharp nod. There was no going back now. Maria Santos was dead. What emerged from her ashes remained to be seen. Carlos opened the passenger door without a word, his weathered face betraying nothing. As Maria slid into the car, she caught sight of her reflection in the side mirror. Same face, same dark eyes, but something fundamental had shifted. The woman staring back looked harder, older, marked by choices that couldn't be unmade. The car pulled away from the hotel, joining the evening traffic that flowed through Medellin's arteries like blood. Carlos drove with the casual competence of someone who knew these streets intimately, weaving between buses, belching diesel smoke, and motorcycles loaded with entire families. The city outside the windows pulsed with life, vendors hawking fruit from wooden carts, children playing soccer in narrow alleys, couples stealing kisses in doorways shadowed by falling night. "Where are we going?" Maria asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "La Señora is waiting," Carlos replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "She has people to show you, rules to explain." He glanced at her equipment bag. "This isn't like your documentary, Señora. No second takes, no editing room safety." The weight of the camera bag on her lap felt different now. Not just tools of observation, but instruments of participation. Every frame she captured from this point forward would make her complicit in whatever followed. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt an unexpected calm settling over her shoulders like an old coat. They climbed into the hills above the city, following roads that grew narrower and more twisted with each turn. The houses changed too, from urban concrete to rural wood and corrugated metal, structures that clung to the mountainside like barnacles. Lights twinkled in the gathering darkness, warm yellow squares of domestic normalcy that seemed impossibly distant from the world Maria was entering. "My daughter," she said suddenly, "if something happens to me—" "Nothing will happen," Carlos interrupted. "La Señora protects family. Always." He downshifted around a hairpin curve, the engine growling with effort. "But the work we do, it changes people. You understand this, yes?" Maria nodded, though she wasn't sure she understood anything anymore. 3 days ago, her biggest concern had been getting Eduardo Vasquez on camera for 30 seconds of usable interview footage. Now she was riding through the Colombian mountains with a man who probably had more blood on his hands than most armies, heading toward a reunion with the mother who'd abandoned her 45 years ago. The compound emerged from the darkness gradually. First a high wall topped with broken glass, then guards with automatic weapons who waved them through an iron gate. Maria counted at least 6 men in the brief glimpse her headlights provided, all carrying themselves with the easy alertness of professional soldiers. This wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. Carlos parked beside a fountain where water trickled over carved stone angels, their faces worn smooth by time and weather. The sound should have been peaceful, but in this context it felt ominous, a gentle melody playing over preparations for war. "Remember," Carlos said as he killed the engine, "everyone here has lost someone to Eduardo's organization. They don't trust outsiders, even family." He studied her face in the dashboard light. "Show no weakness, ask no mercy. They respect strength, nothing else." The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her 30s with intelligent eyes and surgical scars along her left temple. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, but the beretta holstered at her hip suggested this was no ordinary household staff. "Isabella Moreno," the woman said by way of introduction, extending her hand. "I coordinate intelligence operations." Her grip was firm, calloused. "La Señora told me about you. We've been tracking Eduardo's movements since the warehouse. He's getting desperate." They followed Isabella through rooms that mixed domesticity with militarization. Family photos on tables beside radio equipment. Children's drawings taped to walls next to detailed maps marked with colored pins. The cognitive dissonance was jarring, this collision of maternal love and lethal purpose. "How many people work for my mother?" Maria asked. "Directly? Maybe 40, but she has connections throughout the cartels, the government, the military." Isabella paused at a doorway, studying Maria with frank curiosity. "Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty here. You'll have to prove yourself like anyone else." They entered what had once been a dining room but now served as a command center. Maps covered every wall. Medellin, Colombia shipping routes through the Caribbean. A dozen people worked at tables scattered throughout the space, some barely out of their teens, others gray-haired veterans with prison tattoos and thousand-yard stares. All of them looked up when Maria entered, their assessment instant and unforgiving. At the center of it all sat Griselda, changed again into practical field clothes, reading reports with the focused intensity of a general planning campaign. When she looked up and saw Maria, her smile carried equal parts maternal warmth and predatory satisfaction. "Mija," she said, rising from her chair. "Welcome to the family business." The words echoed through the room like a benediction, and Maria realized she was about to learn exactly what those words meant. The silence stretched taut as a wire, 12 pairs of eyes dissecting Maria with the clinical precision of coroners examining evidence. She felt the weight of her camera bag against her shoulder, suddenly conspicuous, marking her as an outsider in a room where trust was earned in blood and betrayal paid the same price. "This is Maria," Griselda announced to the room, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Dixon's sister. She'll be documenting Eduardo's reckoning." A man with silver temples and rope-burn scars on his neck looked up from a stack of surveillance photos. "The Gringa journalist? You sure about this, Jeffa?" Miguel survived 3 years in La Modelo because he knew when to question and when to follow orders, Griselda said mildly, but ice crystallized in her tone. "Which do you think this is?" Miguel's eyes flicked between mother and daughter, cataloging similarities. The stubborn jaw, the way they both held their shoulders when challenged. Whatever he saw there made him nod once and return to his photos without another word. "Eduardo is holed up in a safe house near Envigado," Isabella said, spreading a detailed map across the central table. Red pins marked known locations, blue ones indicated possible escape routes. But he's not running yet. Still thinks he can negotiate his way out of this. Maria moved closer, her filmmaker's eye automatically framing the scene. The concentrated faces bent over tactical plans, weapons cleaned and arranged with religious precision, the casual way these people discussed ending lives like planning a grocery run. Her finger found the record button on her camera bag but didn't press it. "Not yet. What makes him think that?" she asked. "His uncle, Comandante Restrepo, runs significant military operations in the region." A young woman with intricate braids and calloused hands spoke without looking up from the radio equipment she was calibrating. "Eduardo thinks family connections will protect him. Carmen used to work communications for the army," Griselda explained. "Before they decided a woman with opinions was a liability." The bitter edge in her voice suggested Carmen's transition to this work hadn't been voluntary. "She knows how these men think." Carmen finally looked up, studying Maria with frank assessment. "You ever see someone die, journalist lady? I mean really see it. Close enough to smell the blood, hear them calling for their mothers?" "Carmen." Isabella's warning was soft but firm. "No, it's a fair question," Maria said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I've documented war zones, refugee camps, places where death isn't theoretical." She met Carmen's stare directly. "But I've never caused it. That's what you want to know, isn't it? Whether I'll freeze up when this gets real?" A ghost of a smile touched Carmen's lips. "Eduardo killed your brother. That mean anything to you, or is this just another story?" The room went quiet again, waiting. Maria felt the weight of genetic expectation pressing down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. These people had chosen Griselda as their patron saint of vengeance, but they needed to know if her daughter carried the same capacity for ruthless action. "I never knew Dixon existed until 3 days ago," Maria said carefully. "But I know what Eduardo took from this family. From all of your families." She gestured to the photos scattered across Miguel's table, surveillance shots of Eduardo, but also pictures of the dead, young faces that would never age, victims of a war they hadn't chosen. If documenting his punishment serves justice, then yes, it means something. Miguel looked up from his photos, this time with something approaching approval. "You talk like your mother." Careful words hiding sharp teeth. "Teeth are only useful if you're willing to bite," Griselda said. She moved to a wall map marked with shipping routes, her finger tracing paths through the Caribbean. "Eduardo thinks he knows me, thinks I'll come at him with fire and bullets, like some street corner sicario drunk on machismo." Her smile was winter itself. "He has no idea what patient work looks like." What kind of patient work? Maria asked. The kind that starts with understanding your enemy's weaknesses. Griselda nodded to Isabella, who began pulling files from a secured cabinet. Eduardo has a cocaine shipment leaving Cartagena tomorrow night. 2 tons, bound for Miami. Street value around $60 million. Isabella spread shipping manifests and port authority documents across the table. If that shipment disappears, Eduardo can't pay his suppliers, can't pay his soldiers. His whole organization starts eating itself from the inside. And if his uncle, the Comandante, discovers Eduardo has been skimming military transport funds to finance personal vendettas, Carmen's smile was sharp as broken glass. Well, family loyalty only extends so far. Maria felt the pieces clicking into place with mechanical precision. This wasn't just revenge, it was surgery. Griselda wasn't planning to kill Eduardo. She was planning to destroy everything he was, everything he had, everyone who might mourn his passing. By the time she finished, he would beg for the mercy of a bullet. "You want me to record this?" Maria said. "Not a question. I want you to witness it," Griselda replied. "Every frame, every consequence. The world should know what happens to those who harm my children." The room hummed with predatory anticipation, and Maria realized she was no longer deciding whether to participate. She was already in. The convoy rolled through Cartagena's industrial district at 3 in the morning, 18-wheelers loaded with legitimate cargo masking the fortune in white powder hidden in their bellies. Maria crouched behind a shipping container 40 yards away, her camera capturing the mechanical precision of Eduardo's operation through night vision lenses. Guards moved like clockwork between the trucks, automatic weapons casually displayed, their confidence absolute in the darkness. She'd been filming for 6 hours straight, documenting every face, every license plate, every detail that would matter in the reckoning to come. Her back ached from maintaining position, her eyes burned from staring through viewfinders, but she couldn't stop. This footage would either vindicate her choice or condemn her family. There was no middle ground left. Phase 1 begins in 60 seconds. Isabella's voice crackled through the radio earpiece, professional and cold. "Remember, we need Eduardo to believe this is a rival cartel move, nothing that points back to us." Maria watched through her telephoto lens as the first truck pulled toward the port gates. The driver handed papers to the security guard with practiced boredom. They'd done this run dozens of times before. Routine was Eduardo's weakness. Griselda's intelligence network had mapped his operation down to the minute. Then the world exploded. The shipping container beside the lead truck erupted in flame and shrapnel, the detonation so close that Maria felt the heat wash over her face even from her distant position. The truck driver's scream cut through the night before being swallowed by the roar of collapsing metal. Her camera kept rolling automatically while her mind struggled to process the violence. This wasn't the surgical precision they'd planned. This was slaughter. "What the hell?" Isabella's voice crackled with confusion. "That wasn't our explosive. Someone else's—" The radio went dead. Maria's training kicked in, the war correspondent's instinct to document overriding her terror. She swung the camera toward the port entrance, just as black SUVs roared through the gates, military-style vehicles with no license plates. Men in tactical gear poured out, moving with precision that made Eduardo's guards look like amateurs. This wasn't a cartel operation. This was military. Comandante Restrepo had made his choice. Eduardo's men scattered like startled birds, their casual confidence evaporating in automatic weapons fire. Maria watched through her lens as the nephew who'd thought family would protect him stumbled from the port office, his white guayabera splattered with someone else's blood. Even from a distance, she could see the shock on his face, the devastating realization that he'd been abandoned. Her camera followed him as he ran toward the remaining trucks, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage. But the military team had positioned themselves with tactical precision, cutting off every escape route. Eduardo was being herded like prey, driven toward a specific destination with methodical efficiency. That's when Maria understood. This wasn't Comandante Restrepo cleaning house. This was Griselda's plan, executed through channels Maria couldn't even comprehend. Her mother hadn't just stolen Eduardo's shipment, She'd turned his own family against him, using leverage that cut deeper than blood. The radio crackled back to life. "Maria, you need to move, now." Isabella's voice carried urgency bordering on panic. Eduardo broke free. "He's heading your way." Maria looked up from her viewfinder to see a figure scrambling over the shipping containers, moving with the desperate agility of a man who knew death was behind him. Eduardo Vasquez, the cartel boss who'd laughed at Dixon's memory, was running directly toward her position. Her finger hovered over the stop button on her camera. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear into the industrial maze before Eduardo discovered her presence. She was a documentarian, not a soldier. Her job was to record, not participate. But as Eduardo dropped from the container 10 feet away, his eyes wild with panic and rage, Maria realized that distinction had just been obliterated. He saw her camera, saw the telephoto lens pointed at his ruined empire, and his face transformed into something bestial. "You fucking bitch," he snarled, pulling a pistol from his waistband. "You think you can watch me burn like some kind of movie?" Time dilated, each second stretching like warm glass. Maria could see the gun barrel tracking toward her head, could see Eduardo's finger tightening on the trigger, could see her own death reflected in his rage-filled eyes. Behind him, the port burned like a vision of hell, smoke and flame painting the night in shades of judgment. She thought of Dixon, gunned down for the crime of being Griselda's son. She thought of Sophia, sleeping safely in Miami, protected by lies that were about to be revealed as inadequate armor. She thought of all the choices that had led to this moment, 45 years of running from a legacy that had finally caught up. The camera kept rolling as Eduardo's finger completed its journey toward the trigger. Whatever happened next would be preserved forever, one way or another. Maria Santos closed her eyes and discovered what it meant to be a Blanco. The gunshot cracked through the night like breaking bone, but the bullet that should have ended Maria's life went wide, sparking off concrete as Eduardo's aim jerked sideways. He was screaming something in rapid Spanish, clutching his shoulder where blood seeped between his fingers. Someone else's shot had found him first. Maria's eyes snapped open to see Isabella emerging from the smoke, rifle raised, her face carved from stone. "Move!" she shouted, but Maria's legs had turned to water. The camera slipped from her numb fingers, $40,000 of equipment shattering against the concrete, along with 6 hours of irreplaceable footage. Everything, all of it, gone. Eduardo staggered backward, his wounded arm hanging useless, but his left hand still gripped the pistol. Wild-eyed and bleeding, he swung it toward Isabella, then back to Maria, like a cornered animal, unsure which threat to eliminate first. Behind him, the port continued burning, his empire reduced to smoke and twisted metal, but he still had bullets and nothing left to lose. "You Blanco whores think you're so fucking smart," he snarled, blood foaming at the corners of his mouth. "Your precious Dixon died screaming for his mama, begged like a dog before I put him down." The words hit Maria like physical blows. She watched Dixon, a brother she'd never known, die again in Eduardo's taunting voice, and something fundamental cracked inside her chest. All her careful professional distance, all her documentary objectivity, all her desperate attempts to remain separate from this world of blood and vengeance, it all shattered like her camera on the concrete. "You killed him," she whispered, the words scraping raw from her throat. "I killed him slow." Eduardo laughed, a wet, horrible sound, made sure he knew what was coming. "Just like I'm going to—" The second gunshot came from somewhere behind Maria, the bullet catching Eduardo's center mass and spinning him around like a broken marionette. He dropped to his knees, then forward onto his face, the pistol skittering away across the oil-stained concrete. Maria turned to see Griselda stepping from behind a shipping container, smoking pistol held steady in a two-handed grip. Her face was calm, almost serene, as she walked over and put 2 more bullets into Eduardo's skull with methodical precision. "Insurance shots, professional work. Nobody threatens my daughter," she said simply, holstering the weapon. But the victory felt hollow, poisoned by what had been lost. Maria stared at the wreckage of her camera, at the scattered pieces of metal and plastic that represented months of work, years of reputation, the only evidence of tonight's carefully orchestrated revenge. Without that footage, she had nothing. No proof, no story. No way to explain to the world what Eduardo Vasquez had done or what justice looked like when the law failed. The documentation, Maria said numbly. It's all destroyed. Everything we needed to… Mija. Griselda's voice was gentle but firm. This was never about documentation. The words landed like ice water. Maria looked from her mother to Isabella, seeing something in their faces that chilled her more than Eduardo's gun ever had. They'd known the camera would be destroyed, known she would lose everything she'd brought here from her old life. You planned this, Maria breathed. You wanted me to lose the footage, to lose my objectivity, to become family, Griselda finished. You cannot document wolves from the outside, Mija. You can only run with the pack or be eaten by it. Sirens wailed in the distance. Military, police, impossible to tell which. The port blazed like a funeral pyre, casting dancing shadows across Eduardo's corpse and the ruins of Maria's carefully constructed identity. Isabella was already moving, gathering shell casings with practiced efficiency, while Griselda calmly lit a cigarette. We need to go, Isabella said. The cleanup teams will handle the rest, but we can't be found here. Maria knelt beside her broken camera, touching the shattered lens that had been her window into the world for 20 years. The professional distance it provided, the barrier between herself and the stories she told, all of it gone. When she looked up, her reflection stared back from a piece of the broken viewfinder, and she saw her mother's eyes looking back at her. My daughter, she whispered, thinking of Sophia sleeping safely in Miami. When she finds out what I've become, she'll understand, Griselda said, helping Maria to her feet. Or she won't, but you can't protect her from the truth forever. The Blanco blood runs in her veins too. The sirens were getting closer. Maria let herself be led away from the wreckage, away from Eduardo's corpse, away from everything she'd thought she was before tonight. Her hands were steady now, no longer shaking, and she realized with dawning horror that the steadiness came from acceptance. She was no longer documenting the story. She was becoming it. And somewhere in the smoke and shadows of Cartagena's burning port, Maria Santos, the objective journalist, the professional observer, the woman who recorded other people's violence from behind a camera lens, died as completely as Eduardo Vasquez. What walked away with Griselda Blanco was something else entirely.